Somewhere in your house, or your parents' house, there is a small white tablet with a name that ends in LOL, propranolol, metoprolol, atenolol, beta blockers. Tens of millions of prescriptions a year, for hearts, for blood pressure, for nerves. But this drug is different from almost everything else in your cupboard. It was not found by accident. Somebody sat down, worked out what the answer would have to look like, and then built it. So here is the shape of this. A death that started it. A paper nobody would publish. And a trial, in 2025, that took the whole thing apart. Scotland, in the 1940s. A medical student loses his father. Our main character is a Scottish doctor named James White Black. Born in Uddingston in 1924, fourth of 5 sons, raised in a Fife mining town. He won a scholarship to St. Andrews at 15 and qualified in medicine in 1946. And while he was still a student, something happened that decided the rest of his working life. His father was in a minor car crash. He had lived with angina for years, and he did not survive it. Black would later describe lying awake wondering whether the fright itself, and the adrenaline behind it, had stopped a heart that was already struggling. Here is the question the son could not let go of. A crash is a fright. A fright dumps adrenaline into the blood. And adrenaline drives a heart harder than it may be able to go. So we need to talk about angina, because everything Black did next comes out of it. Angina is a mismatch. It is what a heart muscle says when it is working harder than its blood supply can pay for. Nothing is blocked in that moment. The heart is simply overdrawn. Picture 2 lines on a chart. One is supply, the oxygen the arteries can deliver. In a diseased artery that line has a ceiling. The other is demand, which climbs every time the heart beats faster. The pain starts where demand crosses supply. Which gives a doctor exactly 2 options, and only 2. Raise the ceiling that supply can reach. Or lower the demand underneath it. For 100 years, medicine had only ever tried the first one. The main drug for angina was nitroglycerin, the same nitroglycerin as in dynamite, in a dose that will not remove your hand. Put it under the tongue and the chest pain eases in about a minute. It worked. It also gave patients pounding headaches and a flushed red face, every single time. Patients would have taken almost anything else. Nobody had anything else to give them. Black went the other way. Not more oxygen into a starving heart, less work out of it. If the heart asked for less, the ceiling would stop matching. And the fastest way to make a heart ask for less is to slow it down. And that meant going after the thing that speeds a heart up in the first place, which is a hormone you already know by name. Adrenaline. Fight, flight or fright. It is the chemical that makes your heart hammer when a door slams. And that is exactly the problem, because adrenaline does not only talk to your heart. It talks to your lungs, your gut, your blood vessels, your eyes. So blocking adrenaline outright was never an option. Shut it down everywhere and you do not get a calmer heart, you get a patient who cannot stand up. Black needed something no pharmacologist in 1956 could reliably promise him: selectivity. Georgia. 1948. A rejection letter. To get the idea Black needed, we go back 10 years, to an argument about how hormones work at all. By the 1940s, physiologists pictured the body's chemistry as locks and keys. A hormone is a key. A receptor is the lock. And there are 2 separate things a key can do. It can fit, that is affinity. It can turn, that is efficacy. A molecule that fits the lock and refuses to turn would sit in the keyhole, keeping the real key out. That is a blocker. Simple enough. Except in 1948, nobody had ever seen a receptor. It was a useful story, not a proven object. And adrenaline was the awkward case that would not fit the story. Because adrenaline does 2 opposite things. In some tissues it tightens, it squeezes blood vessels shut. In others it relaxes, it opens the airway wide. 1 chemical, 2 contradictory answers. The accepted explanation was sympathin theory. The hormone itself came in 2 flavors, one excitatory, one inhibitory. A pharmacologist named Raymond Alquist, working at a medical school in Augusta, Georgia, thought that was backwards. What if the hormone was just the hormone? What if the difference was not in the key at all, but in the locks? So he tested it, on strip after strip of animal tissue, with a handful of adrenaline-like chemicals. One of them was isoprenoline. On his hypothesis it should have done one job. Instead it did both, it relaxed the airway and it drove the heart rate up. Which is exactly what you would expect if there were two different locks, and this key fit both of them. So he gave them names. Alpha and Beta. Alpha receptors squeeze blood vessels. Beta receptors speed the heart and open the airway. He was, in the essentials, right. He was also, for the field of 1948, insufferable, because he had taken the accepted explanation and thrown it out. The Journal of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, the journal for exactly this work, turned the paper down. It ran instead in the American Journal of Physiology, in 1948. Alquist kept the rejection letter and showed it to people for years. And there the idea sat. Correct, printed, and almost entirely ignored, for the better part of a decade. Until it turned up where ideas go when journals will not carry them. A textbook. In 1956, Black was reading a chapter on adrenergic drugs in Drill's Pharmacology in Medicine, and there was Alquist's two-receptor argument, sitting in print. And Black read it and saw something nobody else had bothered to see. If the heart's adrenaline receptors are a separate type from the ones in the blood vessels, a drug could be built to block only that type. Slow the heart. Leave the rest of the body alone. The selectivity he could not ask for. So he had the target. What he did not have was the chemistry, the money, the chemists, or a laboratory to put any of them in. Cheshire. 1958. He asks for money. So he took the idea to Imperial Chemical Industries, a British chemicals giant with a small pharmaceutical division at Alderley Park in Cheshire. He wanted a grant. They listened, and offered him a job instead. In June 1958, he took it. And now the hard part starts. Because a target is not a drug. He did have one lead. If isoprenoline is a key that fits the beta lock and turns it, then something shaped almost like isoprenoline might fit the same lock and refuse to turn. Change the molecule enough to break the turning, not enough to break the fit. And by luck, two chemists in America had just done exactly that, for a completely different reason. In 1958, Powell and Slater at Eli Lilly published on a compound called dichloroisoprenoline, DCI. They were hunting for a longer-lasting asthma drug. What they found was a molecule that blocked adrenaline's effects instead of copying them. But DCI had a flaw. It sat in the lock and still nudged the mechanism. A tap you cannot fully close. Useful in a paper. Not something you would hand to a patient with a bad heart. So the ICI chemists rebuilt it. In 1960 they swapped the chlorinated end of DCI for a naphthyl ring, a bulkier, double-ring piece of chemistry, and got a new compound. They called it pronethalol. Count the years, because they are the whole reason this story matters. Black joined in 1958 with nothing but a target. 7 years later there was a licensed medicine on a pharmacy shelf. And pronethalol worked. It slowed the heart. It softened the force of each contraction. Patients who used to get chest pain climbing stairs could climb the stairs. The idea Black had carried since his father's death was, finally, a real effect in a real person. And then the long-term toxicology results came back from the animal work. In April 1963, long-term testing showed thymic tumors in mice. ICA launched the drug anyway, that November, under the name Alderlin, restricted to the serious cases, where the alternative was worse. It was the first beta blocker any patient ever took. The name came from the address. Alderley Park, where the work was done, became Alderlin on the label. Remember that, because this company is about to name everything it makes after the same field in Cheshire. Meanwhile the team kept grinding forward, changing one piece of the molecule at a time and testing whatever came out the other end. And in 1964 it paid off. Black, Duncan and Shanks reported a relative of pronethalol that was far more potent and carried none of the tumor problem. Propranolol. ICI put it on the market as Inderol, the same elderly letters, rearranged. Same field, same company, same joke, twice. And a third time later. And that is the moment the method proved itself. Not the drug. The method. Nobody had ground through 10,000 compounds to see which one happened to help. The target was named first, from physiology. The molecule was built to hit it. That is what pharmacology now calls rational drug design, and this is the thing that invented it. Black himself left ICI the same year propranolol arrived, and went to work on stomach acid. He would win a Nobel Prize for both. A pill for chest pain finds other jobs. Black built this thing for angina. Ask anyone today what a beta blocker is for and they will say blood pressure. That swap did not happen because of anything Black did. It happened because medicine changed its mind about what blood pressure even was. Because for most of the 20th century, high blood pressure was not treated as a disease at all. It was filed as a normal part of getting old. Pipes stiffen, pressure rises, that is aging. There is even a fossil of that belief still in the textbooks, the term essential hypertension, which once carried the sense that the pressure was necessary. That the old body needed it. Two things broke that idea in the space of a decade, and neither of them was a beta blocker. The first was a body count. After the Second World War, strokes and heart attacks climbed in America, and a long study of one Massachusetts town started reporting what went with them. By 1957, the early Framingham results pointed straight at blood pressure. The second was a diuretic. A drug that made people urinate more turned out to drop their blood pressure as a side effect, and once doctors had something that could bring the number down, the number stopped being scenery and started being a target. Which created, almost overnight, a market for anything that could lower blood pressure without making you live in the bathroom. And a beta blocker does lower it. Slow the rate, soften each squeeze, and the heart moves less blood per minute. Less blood per minute, through the same pipes, is less pressure on the walls. It was never designed to do that. It just does. Trials in 1964 showed both compounds bringing pressure down in hypertensive patients. And with 2 indications instead of 1, propranolol stopped being a specialist's drug for chest pain and became one of the best-selling medicines in the world through the 1970s. But there was a cost built into the design, and it was hiding in Ahlquist's own paper. Remember what beta receptors do. They speed the heart, and they hold the airway open. So a drug that blocks beta receptors does both jobs at once. It calms the heart you wanted calmed, and it tightens the airway you needed left alone. For a patient with asthma, that is not a side effect. That is an emergency. So the next question wrote itself. Ahlquist had split adrenaline's receptors into 2. Could you split beta itself? In 1967, Lanz and colleagues gave the evidence. There are at least 2 kinds of beta receptor, and they are not evenly distributed. Here is where they sit. Beta 1, mostly on the heart muscle. Beta 2, out in the blood vessels and the airways. Propranolol cannot tell them apart, so it hits both. Build a drug that prefers beta 1 and you lose most of the lung effect. A preference, though. Not a wall. That distinction is going to cost people. ICI got there first, with 2 of Black's former colleagues. In 1968, Dunlop and Shanks published on a compound that slowed the heart without clamping the airway the way propranolol could. It was called practolol, and it went on sale in 1970. Sold as Eraldin, which is Inderol with the letters shuffled. Same field in Cheshire, a third time. Then, around 1974, the report started. Dry, scarring eyes. Damaged corneas. Thickened membranes inside the abdomen. A delayed reaction with a name as long as its list of injuries, oculomucutaneous syndrome. By then it had been given to hundreds of thousands of people. The oral form was pulled worldwide. And the lesson stuck to the whole industry, not just to ICI. A drug can pass every test you know how to run and still be carrying an injury that only shows up years later, in people who have already taken it. The class survived it, because the replacements were already deep in the pipeline by the time the reports landed. Atenolol reached Britain in 1976. Metoprolol came out of Sweden and reached America in 1978 as Lopressor. Those two, and their descendants, are what most people are actually holding today when they hold a beta blocker. And then the drug went somewhere nobody had planned for it at all. Think about what stage fright actually feels like. The hammering chest. The shaking hands. The voice that will not sit still. Those are not the fear itself. Those are adrenaline arriving in the body. And we now had a drug that stands in adrenaline's way. So musicians take them before auditions. Speakers take them before keynotes. It has never been an approved use, no regulator signed off on beta blockers for performance anxiety, and it is prescribed anyway, quietly, by doctors who know exactly what the drug does to a racing pulse. Which raises an obvious question for anyone whose sport is decided by whether your hand is steady at the moment you release. Which is why beta blockers are banned in archery and shooting. Not a stimulant. A calming drug, on the doping list. 60 years after a Scottish doctor tried to stop a heart being driven too hard, the same molecule keeps an archer's hand from twitching. That is what happens when you aim a drug at a mechanism instead of a disease. It follows the mechanism everywhere. America. 1977. 3,000 hearts. By the mid-70s a bigger question was on the table. If a beta blocker shields the heart from adrenaline, what about the heart that has just survived a heart attack, the one most likely to be killed by its own next surge? Nobody knew. So in 1977, America went and found out properly. The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute funded the beta blocker heart attack trial. 3,837 people, aged 30 to 69, all of them recent survivors of a heart attack. Half got propranolol. Half got a placebo. Then everyone waited. This is the machine that produces medical certainty. Take one population, split it at random, treat one half, count the deaths in both. Randomizing is what makes the halves comparable. And the committee watches from outside, because if one side starts winning, continuing means letting people die for paperwork. And in this trial, one side started clearly winning. Over about 25 months of follow-up, 7.2% of the propranolol group had died, against 9.8% on placebo. Small numbers, enormous meaning. The committee stopped the trial 9 months ahead of schedule, because the answer was already in. Understand what stopping a trial early means. It means a committee looked at the numbers and decided it was no longer ethical to keep giving anybody the placebo. That is the strongest result a trial can produce short of a miracle. And from that moment onwards, this stopped being a drug a doctor could choose, and started being a rule that a doctor followed. You survive a heart attack, you go home on a beta blocker. That sentence went into the guidelines, into the training, into the discharge paperwork, and into the routine of essentially every cardiology department on Earth. And it stayed there for 40 years. Nobody was being careless. It was the best evidence anyone had. The problem is what happened to everything around it. Madrid. 2025. The rule breaks. Here is the thing about a rule written in 1981. Everything around it kept moving. Today a blocked artery is physically reopened within hours, the patient goes home on a statin, and that heart is in far better condition than anyone in the trial. So the honest question is not whether beta blockers worked. It is who they still work for. The first crack came in the everyday case. For decades a beta blocker was a normal first prescription for plain high blood pressure. Then reviewers pooled the trials, the whole literature at once, and asked whether that was ever the right opening move. The answer, by the 2017 edition of that review, was no. As a first-line treatment for high blood pressure, beta blockers came out no better than the alternatives on the outcomes that matter, and patients were more likely to stop taking them because of how they felt. And the guideline committees followed the evidence, on both sides of the Atlantic, within a few years of each other. European Cardiology in 2024, and the American Guidelines in August 2025, both put lifestyle first and then reach for other drug classes ahead of beta blockers for most people with high blood pressure. Not banned. Just no longer the automatic answer. But the load-bearing wall was never hypertension. It was bought. It was the heart attack rule. So a team across Spain and Italy went and ran it again, in the modern era, with modern patients. 8,505 of them, at 109 hospitals, all with hearts still pumping reasonably well after their heart attack. Beta blocker, or no beta blocker. They followed them for a median of 3.7 years. 22.5 events per 1,000 patient years on the beta blocker. 21.7 without it. A hazard ratio of 1.04. In plain language, no difference at all. The trial's lead investigator put the problem in one sentence. And there was a second finding that nobody wanted, sitting in the women's data. Women in the trial had more events overall, and, in the investigators' words, especially when they were on beta blockers. Only about 1 in 5 participants was a woman, which is its own long-running problem in cardiology, and the reason that signal needs following rather than trusting. And it is not unanimous, which matters. A second trial published alongside it found the opposite, fewer deaths and fewer major events on beta blockers in a similar group. The honest summary is that a 40-year certainty has turned back into a live question. Nobody should stop a heart medication because a documentary told them the evidence moved. That is a conversation with your own doctor. The drug is not the legacy. So, 2 things to take away from all of that. The first is the method. Before black, drug companies were chemical companies with a habit: make a compound, test it on everything, see what sticks. The library came first and the disease came second. Black reversed the order. Start with the illness, work out the physiology underneath it, name the exact molecular switch you want thrown, and only then go looking for a chemical that throws it. Everything from targeted cancer antibodies to modern antivirals is built that way now. He proved it was not a fluke by doing it a second time, on a completely different organ. At his next company, Black went after the receptor that tells the stomach to make acid, and produced cimetidine, which turned ulcer surgery into a course of tablets. In 1988 he shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the principles behind both drugs. The second takeaway is stranger, and it is about how sciences rescue each other. Ahlquist's theory did not win because pharmacologists were finally persuaded by his tissue experiments. It won because somebody built a drug on top of it and the drug worked. Black said as much himself, and he was careful to say it. A rejected paper, sitting in the wrong journal, read by exactly the right person, roughly 8 years later than it should have been. Which brings us back to the strange shape of this whole story. We got the hard part right. We reasoned out a molecule before it existed, aimed it at a target nobody had ever seen, and it did exactly what it was designed to do. The part we are still arguing about, in 2026, is the easy-sounding one. Not how the drug works. Who should be swallowing it? Cimetidine is the drug Black built next, the same method aimed at a different organ, and it ended an era of stomach surgery. That one is next. Tell me in the comments whether anyone ever explained why you take a beta blocker.